I live in a very remote area in the state of Alabama. My parents, who also live in the same area, are about 30 minutes drive from my place. To add some more context, the route I take to my parents' house consists of back roads that are surrounded by thick woods. On this particular night, I was alone driving to my parents' house after they had called me talking about a family emergency that I won't get into. Anyways, it was late and I was driving well beyond the posted speed limits in a state of worry. I knew this route like it was the back of my hand, so I wasn't paying much attention to my surroundings as I barreled down the back roads. However, as I was approaching a turn that I always took, I noticed something reflective and large pass by my driver's side window. It was a man wearing roadside construction gear and was desperately trying to flag me down to get my attention. This immediately struck me as odd, but his attire looked legit enough. So I stopped just before my turn and stuck my head out the window to hear what he had to say. The man told me that the road I was turning onto was closed for construction and to continue straight instead. Again, this struck me as odd because there was zero sign of construction activity other than this man. No lights or sound in the distance, no tractors or other equipment, just this strange man in construction gear alone at night. Regardless of how strange this was, I obliged and continued straight instead of turning. This detour wasn't much longer, but it consisted of a much tighter road that had multiple blind turns down it. The route I was now taking was also noticeably more heavily wooded than my normal route. The blind turns didn't slow down my pace much. I was taking turns way more recklessly than I should have in an attempt to get to my parents' house as quickly as possible. That's when, suddenly, something in the road just off a blind turn caused me to slam on my brakes and swerve as hard as possible. There were multiple planks of wood scattered across the road, and protruding out of these planks were hundreds of nails just waiting to blow my tires. I sat there frozen in shock for a moment, windows halfway down and listening to the idle of my truck, when I suddenly heard a woman scream just past the tree line. There was something off about the scream though. The volume didn't match quite the intensity of the scream. It sounded as if someone was playing a recording of a scream from a speaker of some sort in an attempt to get me out of my truck. This instantly bugged me out, and I immediately decided to not investigate and get the fuck out of there. The worst part about this was the road was so tight that it was practically a 4-point turn for me to turn my truck around. And while I was in the process of turning my truck around, my headlights clearly exposed 3 men behind the tree line. They must have known that my headlights exposed them, because when I spotted them they decided to jump out of the tree line and rush my truck. I floored it, going off the road and halfway into the ditch before managing to pull myself back out and take off. As traumatizing as this was, I continued back onto my normal route and made my way to my parents' house. There was no sign of that man in the construction gear at the turn I was supposed to take. There was no construction at all on that road, and the entire thing had been made up to lure me into a sinister trap. The next day, I filed a police report, but it turned up with nothing. I still have nightmares to this day about what would have happened if I hit the makeshift spike strip that was set up for me that night. I posted this on another thread back in August, but figured I'd share it again. Of the countless hours I've spent in the woods, it's the one time, the only few seconds, that I can't explain. A distant hike when I can. Sometimes this means getting up early or staying out late to get as many miles in as possible. Sometimes, walking in the pitch dark with a low light headlamp gets spooky. I grew up in the woods of this area. I've slept under a canopy of stars more nights than I can count. I've trekked thousands of miles of trail, riverbank, lakeshore, ridge, bottoms, bogs, and creeks. I've hunted the game. I'm establishing this because it's important you understand I've heard, seen, and smelt about all this region has to offer in the way of wilderness. My scariest experience, though, happened at about 4:30 in the morning. It was late spring, so the first morning light wouldn't be visible in the treetops for about 30 to 45 minutes. Another hour passed that until sunrise. I was on mile 5. I'm in a low bottom that's wedged between two steep ridges. The trail I'm on was narrow, muddy, and completely hemmed in by thick underbrush, young maple, and old oak growth. I'm focused on the small light from my headlamp, just one step after the other, zoned out. Then I heard a loud crack, and I froze solid. This is the part I have trouble describing. 4:30 in springtime means I'm the only thing making noise. No birds chirping, nothing. Dead quiet. Mid-step I froze. When fight or flight kicks in, you have that immediate instinctual thought. The thought that was instantly flashed in my mind as I stood there balancing myself into silence was, if I hear that again, I'm turning around, and I'm going back the way I came in a hurry. Why? Because that sound was not a branch breaking. It wasn't deadfall. It wasn't a widowmaker. I was damn sure I had just heard something intentional. Hearing it twice, well, that meant get out of there. To describe it at best I can, it sounded like a decent-sized wooden stick being violently whacked against the smallest tree. More a fungo bat-sized stick than a baseball bat. The distinction in my head being that this sound was a crack and not a thud or thump. And I have described it as explosive in the past because it was so sudden and so terribly loud. I had the sense that it was about 50 yards directly in front of me, and it was loud and clear. Now, as I stood there, completely spooked, I realized the soon-to-be worst part of my situation. I knew where the sound came from, and I knew where the trail went. In about 30 yards, I was going to come to a 180-degree turn and start up the ridge going away from the creek. This meant, as soon as I got the courage to move towards this noise, I was going to have to turn my back to it and get up that ridge. This made me very nervous. My head somewhere between meth fiend murder and Bigfoot bludgeoning. Minutes pass. I just breathe my foggy breath into my glasses and listen. Nothing. Dead quiet. I've got about 20 to 30 minutes until first light. I crank up the headlamp and start to slowly creep to the 180 turn. When you wear a headlamp in the woods at night, every branch in front of you casts a big black moving shadow on the trail. It didn't help. I get to the turn and quickly make the bend. I'm moving pretty fast at this point, trying to be quiet, taking tiny shallow breaths so I can listen while booking it up the trail. And then I smell it. A stench hits me that I can't describe. I just imagine wet, rotten death. This was like days-old decomposition, but it just smelled strange. I kept walking fast. By the time I made the top of that ridge, I was huffing, and first light was showing. I didn't stop moving until full light was out and the birds were chirping. I've heard it all in our woods. I've smelled it all. I'm telling you, I don't know what the hell that was. Deadfall, and especially leafed-out branches, make a lot of noise on the way down. I've heard it many times. I don't know.